Come the day itself, Sky reflected the austere, belt-tightening mood of the nation by cracking out the exciting Skycopter to follow Darling the few hundred metres from Downing Street to Westminster. They also wheeled out lots of grubby urban Banksy-style graphics and held scintillating interviews with the stars.
What did you make of the budget? Do you feel, as a pensioner, better off at the end of it all?
Hang on a minute, is that, it's Victor Meldrew's wife. I don't believe it. Do you get it? I don't, oh. Just leave me alone.
Away from Sky, the BBC covered the Money-Geddon budget by highlighting the toxic state of the economy, while 5 News, which is in no way a dumbed-down source of current affairs, highlighted the seriousness of Darling's debt crisis by illustrating it in the most bizarre manner possible.
But this year, Alistair Darling appears a lonely figure at the mercy of events, controlled by forces which give him hardly any freedom of action.
God, you know, TV fakery really has gone too far.
Yes, they made a lovely little puppet show featuring an unbelievably cheap Alistair Darling marionette apparently made by a psychopath. And they got their money's worth. We saw him enjoying the riverside and having a shit in a field and caressing his bright red box and walking gaily down the road and camping it up at a building site and standing on a wall and sitting at the wheel of a car and chatting up some birds and waving his money around and impishly wagging his eyebrow and going mental at a garage and being shunned in a pub and telling off a silly man in the foreground and walking past Whitehall and all confusing a bystander and then getting a little migraine before giving up and cutting back to the studio.
Andy, let's talk more about national debt.
No, Andy, let's talk more about what the f*** you were doing with that puppet.
These days, if some major news event happens, chances are you'll find out about it on the internet or via a text message. But once upon a time, the news used to be printed on sheets of paper using something called ink. And these newspapers were apparently a primary source of current affairs. It used to be the case that papers would report things that may have happened, a week ago, but that was okay because the world ran at a slightly more sedate pace back then. Since the beginning of the 20th century, the press has been forced to adapt in the face of emerging whippersnapper technologies. Radio had some impact, but when TV appeared, summarising the news in a visually appealing way and drawing millions of viewers in the process, the press was forced to switch focus away from breaking traditional stories and towards snazzy photographs and human interest pieces. The advent of the internet and a collapse in advertising revenue has massively accelerated the newspaper's transformation from news vessels to lifestyle comics. The mid-market press, for example, is obsessed with scare stories, house prices and moral campaigns, campaigning in particular being a goldmine for papers as it creates a simple narrative of its own that can often yield palpable results. The BBC's terrified of the Daily Mail, for instance, which has been campaigning against it for years. In fact, if you imagine this harrowing footage represents the relationship between the BBC and the press, then the Mail is basically Trevor and the Beeb is Little Mo, but with less balls. Meanwhile, the Red Tops have become violently dispiriting celebrity gossip rags, filled with pictures of starlets clambering out of cars outside a nightclub, taken by a paparazzi scumbag, literally lying on the ground amongst the fag butts and the dog shit, in the hope of spotting a glimpse of lady pants. The quality press, for its part, has a demented emphasis on opinion pieces headed by photographs of people grinning like idiots or looking constipated or pulling embarrassing warthog scowls. And when they're not full of that, they're running wanky lifestyle features about which expensive designer shoe is going to go best with your organic food delivery, or they're bombarding you with free bloody wall charts like that's going to improve your stinking life. Yeah, a bloody wall chart, that's going to be good, isn't it? Why don't you stick that on your stupid bloody wall, you prick? Go on, do that, look at that, see how much better that makes your life, you Of course, that's just the print editions I'm caricaturing there. It's a different kettle of chips online, which is where the papers are hoping their future lies. All the major newspaper brands are now also thrusting multi-platform thingamajigs, replete with moving pictures, message boards and interactive widgets. All of that costs money, not enough of which is being generated by the websites at the moment. As the money runs out, titles are cutting back and many local papers are closing entirely. In short, being a newspaper journalist right now must be about as much fun as gargling cold cow piss for a living. Beleaguered though it may be, the press still exerts a huge influence over many aspects of British behaviour, especially in the corridors of power. The media and the powers that be. The powers that be and the media. Just how much in cahoots are they? Here's veteran political journalist Peter Oborne with his view. It's his view.
The collusion between media and government stretches down to a very, very detailed and precise level. Let me give you one example. Several years ago, the Sun newspaper launched a campaign against asylum seekers. didn't like them very much, felt that they were abusing the system. That apparently was very critical of the government. And they launched their campaign, and at the end of that campaign, they had an interview with the then Home Secretary David Blunkett, who made certain concessions, said the Sun was right about asylum seekers, and so the Sun could claim some form of victory. I got hold of the Downing Street grid, in which they laid out in advance future events. What was fascinating was that the Downing Street grid, prepared in advance of the Sun campaign, had the Sun campaign on it, down to the day when David Blunkett would give his interview. So what the Sun did, which appeared to Sun readers to be a spontaneous attack on government policy on asylum seekers, was actually an orchestrated performance with Downing Street, which excluded Sun readers, and it's all a performance, it's all choreographed, and it's quite disturbing, I think, for British democracy.
Whatever happens with papers, the influence of the blogosphere is on the rise, as clearly illustrated by the recent dismal case of Damien McBride, or Damien McPoison, or Dirty McMuck, or whatever they're calling him today.
Damien McBride was Gordon Brown's special advisor, or attack dog as the news christened him in a series of rather nauseating headlines.
Although he doesn't really look like an attack dog, more like a nodding dog.
You know, like the one from those cheerful and chummy insurance ads. He looks a bit like you, doesn't he?
Oh, yes.
For somebody apparently so important, it was strange the news had such little footage of him, almost as though they'd been ignoring his existence for years. They had to slow down and highlight the meagre clips they had just so you could pick him out in the crowd.
Watching it was a bit like playing Where's Wally, but starring a small pink moon. Even before the smear scandal broke, it was fair to say politicians have never been quite as unpopular as they are now.
In fact, recent scientific studies show conclusively that even glancing at a politician causes the average citizen to vomit uncontrollably. There are a few notable exceptions, but on the whole they're less popular than shingles. Anyway, over the past few years, the Labour Party has watched in dismay as right-wing political blogs have thrived online, with perhaps the biggest turn in their punch bowl being Guido Fawkes' Westminster Gossip and Sleaze site, which is run by a mysterious silhouetted figure seen here having his cover blown on Newsnight some time back.
Why do you insist on this preposterous disguise?
Well, so I can go undercover.
No, I saw you at a lunch once where everybody else was in a tie. You were wearing a rugby shirt, and somebody said, "That's Paul Staines. He's Guido Fawkes." And I said, "Get away, is it?" He looked a bit of a prat.
Yes, Guido is actually a guy called Paul Staines, played here by a sort of made-over Oliver Hardy.
He claims not to be a Tory, incidentally, but a broadly anti-politics libertarian. Although whatever he is, he certainly seems to be a bit of a tit.
Sometimes he does hilariously arrogant things, like posting this charming snap of him enjoying a cigar on a city balcony overlooking the G20 protests.
Still, tit or not, the papers are certainly scared of him, and he gets results.
For instance, Peter Hain resigned after Guido's revelations about campaign donations.
The Guido Fawkes site, and others like it, routinely bristle with comment, innuendo, criticism and boneheaded abuse, just like any other message board on the internet, or any newsroom, or this show.
Anyway, Labour were keen to launch a snarky counter-site of their own called Red Rag. Derek Draper was going to oversee it, and Damien McBride sent him an email suggesting a bunch of pungently repellent smear stories to run on the thing.
Somehow they ended up in the hands of Guido Fawkes, he handed them to the papers, and boom, it exploded all over the news like a balloon full of hot sewage.
McBride resigned soon after, blaming Guido Fawkes for not playing fair. Oh, and Derek Draper had a little moan about it too.
What a world we live in, where private personal emails can be used in this way.
Oh, boo-hoo. Actually, with Guido Fawkes on one side and the likes of Damien McBride on the other, it's been like watching two immense monsters made of shit fighting each other in some sort of f***ed Godzilla movie. Except, of course, no matter how big an arse Guido Fawkes may or may not be, he's not a civil servant with wages paid by the taxpayer, which is what McSpunk was.
Once the story broke, the focus quickly shifted to whether Gordon Brown would apologise or not. First he expressed regret in a series of letters, but that wasn't good enough for the Tories. The pressure mounted on Brown to say sorry properly, which he seemed comically incapable of doing.
Prime Minister, will you apologise for the Damien McBride emails?
Gordon Brown. As the days dragged on, the Tories got to set the news agenda.
David Cameron seized the opportunity to liven up an already lively day for Sky News by mentioning the word change about 1 billion times.
What this whole episode demonstrates is the need for change. Not change in the Special Advisor's code, but change in the culture at number 10 Downing Street. Change of government. We need change in order to change the culture. Change, and we need some change.
But change the record.
Then Francis Maud depressed those same Sky viewers with his doubt that Gordon Brown would ever say sorry.
He's not going to apologise, we know that. Gordon Brown's constitutionally incapable of saying sorry.
Although a few days later, that's precisely what he did.
Well, I'm sorry about what happened.
Yes, it was such a humiliating climb down for the Brown minister. Even a stranger in a hard hat in the background who wandered into shot had to piss off out of sheer embarrassment.